The biting wind howled across the vast expanse of frozen land, a relentless white blur that seemed to stretch into eternity. Elias, a man whose face was etched with the lines of solitude and hardship, tugged at the thick fur of his coat, the familiar cold a constant companion. For a trapper in the late 19th century Alaskan wilderness, life was a brutal cycle of survival, punctuated by the silence of the snow and the creak of his snowshoes. His cabin, a small sanctuary against the unforgiving elements, felt more like a tomb than a home. He'd spent years trading furs, his only contact with civilization being the occasional trip to the nearest outpost, a place where men traded stories and whiskey, but never true companionship. As the day waned, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange that bled into the deepening twilight, a sound tore through the quiet. Not the usual cry of a wolf or the snap of a branch, but a human moan, weak and desperate. Elias, his senses honed by years of living on the edge, followed the sound, his heart pounding a rhythm of both caution and curiosity. He pushed through a thicket of snow-laden pines, his breath a cloud in the frigid air, and saw her. A young Inuit woman, her traditional parka almost swallowed by the snow, lay against the trunk of a fallen tree. Beside her, wrapped in layers of caribou hide, were 3 small bundles. Her face, a beautiful tapestry of strength and exhaustion, was pale under the dim light. Her eyes, dark and deep, met his with a mixture of fear and defiance. In a hushed, trembling voice she spoke, a language he barely understood, but whose meaning was clear from the context of her pain and the tiny cries of the newborns. She had given birth alone in the unforgiving cold, and was now at the end of her strength. Her village was a long journey away, a journey she could not possibly make with her 3 infant daughters. Elias, who had never felt the touch of a family, let alone the responsibility of one, looked from the woman to the 3 fragile lives beside her. He saw not a burden, but a reflection of his own isolation. The silence of his cabin, the one he thought he craved, now felt unbearable. The needs of these 4 lives, however, were immediate and overwhelming. He knew the dangers, the gossip, the cultural divide that separated them. But as he stood there, watching the snow fall on them, a different instinct took over. It was an instinct to protect, to shelter, to bring a glimmer of warmth into the cold. He looked at the woman again, a silent promise forming in his mind. He had to help them. He had to get them to safety. His voice, unused to expressing such an offer, came out rough but steady. "I'll take you home," he said, extending a gloved hand. He knew he wasn't just offering to take her to his cabin. He was offering to be their anchor in a world that had abandoned them. His cabin, once a symbol of his solitude, would now have to become a home. Elias carefully helped the Inuit woman to her feet, supporting her weight as they slowly made their way towards his cabin. Each step was a struggle for her, her body weakened by childbirth and exposure. The 3 infants, bundled tightly in furs, remained quiet, seemingly conserving their energy in the face of the harsh environment. The journey to the cabin, which usually took Elias a brisk hour, stretched into what felt like an eternity. He kept a watchful eye on the woman, stopping frequently to allow her to rest, his own discomfort from the cold and the unfamiliar responsibility momentarily forgotten. When they finally reached the small log cabin, a plume of smoke curling from its chimney a welcome sign, Elias felt a wave of relief wash over him. The interior was Spartan but functional, a single room with a wood-burning stove, a rough-hewn table, and a sleeping bunk covered with animal hides. He gently guided the woman to the bunk, laying her down carefully. He then turned his attention to the babies, his large, calloused hands surprisingly tender as he checked their tiny faces. They were frail but alive, their small chests rising and falling with each shallow breath. The woman, whose name Elias still didn't know, watched him with a wary but grateful gaze. Communication was difficult. a mix of gestures and a few shared words, but the understanding between them was growing. Elias busied himself, preparing a warm broth from dried meat and melted snow, the comforting aroma filling the small space. He offered it to the woman, who accepted with a nod of thanks, her eyes holding a hint of the deep pain she had endured. As she slowly sipped the broth, Elias noticed the intricate tattoos on her chin, markings that spoke of her heritage and her journey. He wondered about her village, her family, the life she had left behind. Taking care of the 3 newborns proved to be a daunting task for Elias, who had never held a baby before. He fumbled with the small bundles, unsure how to properly hold or comfort them. The woman, despite her exhaustion, guided him with gentle hands and soft coos. He learned to change their moss-lined wrappings, to offer them small drops of broth from a fur-lined cup, and to rock them in his arms until their tiny cries subsided. In those first few days, confined to the small cabin by a relentless blizzard, an unexpected bond began to form. Elias, the solitary trapper, found himself immersed in the constant needs of the woman and her daughters, his life irrevocably changed by the echo of new life in the heart of the Alaskan winter. As the blizzard subsided, a fragile peace settled over the cabin. The woman, whom Elias learned was named Aputi, meaning snow in her language, slowly regained her strength. Her movements were still cautious, but the color had returned to her cheeks, and the exhaustion in her eyes had lessened, replaced by a quiet determination. The 3 girls, each with delicate features resembling their mother, began to show their own distinct personalities. One was quiet and observant, another cried with a surprising intensity, and the third seemed content to sleep most of the time. Elias found himself constantly observing them, a sense of wonder mixed with the overwhelming responsibility of their care. Communication between Elias and Aputi remained rudimentary, yet they found ways to understand each other. Aputi would point to objects, and Elias would say the corresponding word in English. She would then repeat it, her Inuit tongue giving the sounds a unique cadence. He, in turn, began to pick up a few of her words, the guttural sounds feeling foreign but becoming increasingly familiar. Their days were filled with the rhythm of survival. Elias tending to his traps, Aputi caring for the babies, and both working together to keep the fire burning and the small cabin warm against the persistent chill. One crisp morning, as Elias returned from checking his traplines, he found Aputi standing outside the cabin, gazing at the vast, snow-covered landscape. She held one of the babies close to her chest, her breath misting in the cold air. He joined her, the silence between them comfortable now, no longer the heavy silence of 2 strangers. She pointed towards the distant horizon, her expression a mixture of longing and sadness. He understood that she missed her home, her people. He knew that their current arrangement was temporary, that eventually he would have to help her find her way back to her community. The thought brought a strange pang of unease. In the short time they had been together, a fragile connection had formed, woven from shared hardship and the delicate threads of new life. He had grown accustomed to the soft cries of the babies, to Aputi's quiet presence in his cabin. The prospect of them leaving felt like a looming emptiness, a return to the profound solitude he had once known. Yet he also knew it was the right thing to do. Aputi belonged with her people, and the babies deserved to be raised within their culture. As the days grew longer and the first signs of spring began to appear on the horizon, Elias knew that their time together in the small cabin was drawing to a close, and the whispers of the wild seemed to carry both a promise of new beginnings and a hint of inevitable separation. The gradual thaw brought with it a mix of relief and new challenges. The days grew longer, and the relentless grip of winter began to loosen its hold on the land. However, the melting snow also made travel more treacherous, turning the icy ground into a slippery, uneven terrain. Elias knew that the time to consider the journey back to Aputi's village was approaching, but the thought filled him with a growing apprehension. He had grown accustomed to their presence, the once empty cabin now filled with the sounds of their life together. Aputi, sensing the changing season, began to gather materials, meticulously preparing for the journey. She fashioned warmer clothing for the babies from soft furs and mended her own parka with skilled hands. Elias watched her, a silent admiration growing for her resilience and her deep connection to the land. He knew that she possessed a knowledge of the terrain and survival skills that far surpassed his own. He would rely heavily on her guidance when they eventually set out. One afternoon, as they were both outside the cabin, Elias noticed a set of unfamiliar footprints in the softening snow. They were the tracks of snowshoes, larger than his own, indicating the presence of another person in their isolated corner of the wilderness. A wave of unease washed over him. Encounters with other trappers were rare in this remote area, and he couldn't shake the feeling that these tracks meant trouble. He didn't mention his discovery to Aputi, not wanting to cause her unnecessary worry, but he kept a closer watch on the surrounding woods, his rifle never far from his reach. The following days were filled with a palpable tension. Elias found it difficult to focus on his trapping, his mind preoccupied with the unknown presence in the area. He double-checked his traps and kept a vigilant eye on the perimeter of the cabin. Aputi, attuned to his change in demeanor, looked at him with concern in her dark eyes. He offered her a reassuring smile, but the knot of anxiety in his stomach remained. He knew that the Alaskan wilderness held many dangers, not just from the elements, but also from other people driven by desperation or greed. The melting snow, while signaling the end of winter, also seemed to be revealing potential threats, casting a shadow over the fragile peace they had found in their isolated sanctuary. If you're invested in Elias and Aputi's story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter and find out what the mysterious footprints mean. The unease Elias felt intensified in the following days. The footprints in the snow reappeared closer to the cabin, and he even heard the distant crackle of a campfire one night. He made sure the cabin door was securely bolted each evening and kept his rifle loaded and within reach. He knew that in this harsh land, encounters with strangers could often turn dangerous. Resources were scarce, and desperation could drive people to extreme measures. One morning, as Elias was chopping firewood near the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged from the trees. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with a weathered face and eyes that held a mixture of weariness and suspicion. He was dressed in worn furs and carried a rifle loosely in his hands. Elias tensed, his axe held ready. The man stopped a few yards away, his gaze sweeping over the cabin. "You're a long way from anywhere," the stranger said, his voice rough. "Didn't think anyone else was this far out." Elias remained silent for a moment, assessing the man. He didn't appear immediately hostile, but there was an air of desperation about him that made Elias cautious. "Trapping," Elias replied curtly, resuming his chopping. The stranger's eyes narrowed. "Alone?" Before Elias could answer, the cabin door opened, and Aputi stepped out, holding one of the babies wrapped securely in her arms. The stranger's gaze shifted to her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before a flicker of something that looked like surprise crossed his face. "Well, well," the stranger said slowly, his eyes moving from Aputi to the baby and then back to Elias. "Looks like you're not so alone after all." The encounter was brief, but unsettling. The stranger didn't approach any closer, nor did he offer his name. After a few more tense exchanges, he simply nodded curtly and disappeared back into the trees. Elias watched him go, a sense of foreboding settling in his chest. He knew that their isolation had been compromised, and the presence of the stranger could mean trouble for him and Aputi. He had a feeling that this was not the last they would see of him. Elias recounted his encounter with the stranger to Aputi. using a combination of gestures and the few words they shared. She listened intently, her dark eyes reflecting his concern. Though she hadn't understood all his words, she grasped the underlying tension in his voice and the worry etched on his face. Her own instincts, honed by a life lived close to the land, told her that the appearance of a stranger in their isolated territory was not a good sign. They spent the next few days in a state of heightened vigilance. Elias made sure to always be armed when he ventured out, and Aputi kept a watchful eye on the surrounding woods from the cabin. They spoke little, their shared anxiety creating a heavy silence within the small space. The usual rhythm of their days was disrupted by a sense of unease, a feeling that their fragile peace was threatened. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the three babies asleep in their furs, Aputi pointed to a small, intricately carved wooden figure she had been working on. It was a protective amulet, a traditional Inuit symbol meant to ward off evil spirits and bring good fortune. She offered it to Elias, her gesture a silent expression of her concern and her desire to protect their makeshift family. Elias accepted the amulet, feeling a warmth spread through him despite his skepticism toward such things. It was a symbol of their growing bond, a testament to the trust and care that had developed between them in the face of adversity. They knew that they had to be prepared for whatever the stranger's presence might mean. Elias reinforced the cabin door and windows, and they discussed, using simple gestures, a plan of action if the stranger returned. They would stay together, protect the babies, and be ready to defend themselves if necessary. The isolation that had once been Elias's solace now felt like a vulnerability. But in that shared vulnerability, a new kind of strength was emerging, forged in the crucible of the Alaskan wilderness and the unexpected bond between a lonely trapper and an Inuit woman. Days turned into a week, and the stranger did not reappear. A cautious sense of relief began to settle over Elias and Aputi, though the memory of the encounter lingered. The incident had served as a stark reminder of the dangers of their isolation and the unpredictable nature of life in the wilderness. Elias found himself more determined than ever to ensure Aputi and the baby's safety. He knew that eventually he would have to take them to her village, but the journey was still fraught with peril. One afternoon, while Elias was sorting through his furs, Aputi approached him hesitantly. She held a small, worn piece of leather in her hand, adorned with intricate beadwork. She spoke softly in her language, her expression a mixture of sadness and longing. Elias didn't understand the words, but he recognized the depth of emotion in her voice. She gently placed the leather piece in his hand. He examined it closely, recognizing the symbols as belonging to her people. It was clearly a treasured item, perhaps a keepsake from her family or her past. In that moment, Elias felt a profound understanding of Aputi's situation. She was not just a woman he had found in the snow. She had a life, a history, a community that she had been separated from. The weight of her past and her longing for her home became palpable. He looked at her, his heart filled with a newfound empathy. He knew that his responsibility extended beyond simply providing shelter and food. He needed to help her reconnect with her people, to allow her and her daughters to return to their roots. He gently squeezed her hand, offering a silent promise that he would do everything he could to help her. He kept the beaded leather close, a tangible reminder of her journey and the ties that bound her to her past. The encounter with the stranger had been a threat, but Aputi's quiet sharing of her memento was a deeper connection, a glimpse into the heart of the woman he had taken into his care. The wilderness may have thrown them together, but it was their shared humanity and growing respect for each other that would guide their path forward. The story of Elias and Aputi continues. Subscribe now to see what decisions they make and what challenges they face as they navigate their uncertain future. With the memory of the stranger still lingering and the understanding of Aputi's longing for home deepening, Elias knew that the time to prepare for their journey was drawing near. The weather was becoming milder, and the melting snow was gradually giving way to patches of soft earth. The rivers would soon be flowing freely, offering a potential route, albeit a challenging one. Elias began to gather supplies for the arduous trek. He mended his snowshoes and crafted a lighter sled that could be easily pulled over uneven terrain. He sorted through his provisions, setting aside dried meat, fish, and other essential items. Aputi contributed her knowledge, helping him select the warmest furs for the babies and preparing traditional remedies for potential ailments. They worked together with a quiet efficiency, their unspoken understanding growing stronger with each passing day. Communication remained a blend of gestures and broken words, but their shared purpose transcended the language barrier. Elias learned more about Aputi's village, its approximate location, and the landmarks that would guide them. She drew simple maps in the dirt, pointing to mountains, rivers, and forests that held significance for her people. He listened intently, trying to commit every detail to memory. The 3 baby girls were growing stronger each day, their tiny personalities becoming more pronounced. They were a constant reminder of the urgency of their journey, a motivation to reach safety and community. Elias found himself increasingly attached to them, the thought of saying goodbye a bittersweet ache in his heart. He had never imagined himself caring for a family, yet these 4 lives had become inextricably intertwined with his own. As they prepared for their departure, Elias couldn't shake a sense of unease. The wilderness held many unpredictable dangers, and the journey to Aputi's village was long and potentially perilous. He worried about the weather, about encountering wild animals, and about the possibility of crossing paths with the stranger again. Despite his anxieties, he knew that he had to undertake this journey for Aputi and her daughters. It was the right thing to do, a debt of humanity repaid in the vast and unforgiving landscape of the Alaskan frontier. With their meager supplies packed and the 3 babies secured in warm bundles on the sled, Elias and Aputi set out. The early spring air was crisp and carried the scent of thawing earth. The journey began slowly, the uneven terrain making each step a test of endurance. Elias pulled the sled, his muscles straining with the effort, while Aputi walked beside him, her knowledge of the land proving invaluable in navigating the best path. The landscape was both beautiful and unforgiving. Towering, snow-capped mountains loomed in the distance, while closer to them, patches of wildflowers pushed through the melting snow, a vibrant splash of color against the muted tones of the wilderness. They crossed icy streams, the frigid water seeping into their boots, and trudged through muddy patches where the snow had completely thawed. Aputi proved to be a resilient and resourceful traveler. She knew how to read the signs of the land, pointing out animal tracks and edible plants. She taught Elias how to better navigate the changing snow conditions and how to find shelter when the weather turned inclement. Their communication, though still limited, became more fluid, a shared understanding built on their common goal. The babies, surprisingly, endured the journey relatively well. They slept for long stretches, lulled by the rhythmic motion of the sled, and Aputi was quick to comfort them whenever they became fussy. Elias found himself constantly checking on them, his initial awkwardness replaced by a protective instinct he never knew he possessed. Days blurred into a rhythm of walking, resting, and tending to their needs. They faced challenges, a sudden snow squall that forced them to take shelter in a shallow cave, a tense encounter with a curious grizzly bear that Elias managed to scare away with a shot from his rifle, and the constant ache of tired muscles and cold feet. Through it all, their determination remained unwavering, fueled by the hope of reaching Aputi's village and the growing bond that had formed between them. The long trek had begun, and with each step they moved closer to an uncertain future, their fates intertwined in the vast and awe-inspiring Alaskan wilderness. After many days of arduous travel, following Aputi's guidance and enduring the unpredictable moods of the Alaskan spring, they finally saw it, a cluster of small, sturdy structures nestled in a sheltered valley near a winding river. Smoke curled from several rooftops, and the faint sounds of voices and the barking of dogs drifted on the breeze. It was Aputi's village. A wave of emotion washed over Aputi's face. Relief, joy, and a deep sense of homecoming were evident in her eyes as she quickened her pace, her weariness seemingly forgotten. Elias followed, a mixture of relief and a bittersweet sadness in his own heart. They had made it. They had overcome the challenges of the journey, and Aputi was finally home. As they approached the village, figures emerged from the structures, their faces showing curiosity and then recognition as they saw Aputi. Excited cries erupted, and several people rushed forward to greet her, their expressions a mixture of concern and overwhelming joy. Aputi was embraced by an older woman, presumably her mother, and other villagers crowded around, their eyes widening as they saw the 3 babies nestled on the sled. Elias stood slightly apart, watching the emotional reunion unfold. He felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had helped bring Aputi and her daughters back to their community. Yet, there was also a pang of loneliness, knowing that his time with them was coming to an end. Aputi turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She spoke to him in her language, and though he didn't understand all the words, the warmth in her voice and the sincerity in her gaze conveyed her heartfelt thanks. Some of the villagers approached Elias, offering nods of respect and gestures of welcome. He was an outsider, but they recognized the role he had played in bringing one of their own home. As the days passed, Elias stayed in the village, learning more about Aputi's people and their way of life. He helped with tasks and shared what little he could. The bond between him and Aputi remained strong, a silent understanding that transcended words. When it was finally time for him to leave, the farewell was heartfelt. Aputi presented him with a beautifully crafted pair of moccasins, a token of her appreciation. As Elias turned and began his journey back into the vast wilderness, he looked back one last time at the village nestled in the valley. He was alone once more, but he was no longer the same lonely trapper who had found a woman in the snow. He carried with him the memory of shared hardship, the warmth of an unexpected connection, and the knowledge that even in the most desolate corners of the world, humanity and hope could flourish. The horizon ahead was uncertain, but it no longer felt quite so empty. Thank you for following Elias and Aputi's journey. If you enjoyed their story, please subscribe to the channel for more compelling tales of human connection in extraordinary circumstances.